proximity premium. Can nearshoring shockproof U.S. supply chains? Jean-Pierre Trouillot is regional advisory leader with KPMG Americas. Hello, Jean-Pierre.
Hi, Robert. Nice to be with you.
And Mary Rollman is principal and supply chain leader in the advisory practice of KPMG US. Hello, Mary.
Hello.
Thank you both so much for being with me today. So the report we're talking about today is called the Proximity Premium, Strategically Reshaping Supply Chains in the Americas. What are the main trends highlighted here? Let me ask you first, Jean-Pierre.
Robert, this report sheds light on important industry trends and challenges, particularly the vulnerabilities often associated with globalized and long supply chains. It looks at how unexpected market and geopolitical events are pushing businesses to rethink and reshape the supply chain landscape at large. Key factors that are driving supply chain decisions today are market access, talent, natural resources, tax and regulatory incentives. Companies are recognizing the need for stronger, more agile and flexible supply chains, which is why many are shifting their operations closer to the Americas region.
Mary, what do you think? What do you think of the big takeaways from a very high level of this survey?
Yeah, the survey was really interesting to see that so many companies were reevaluating the business case for a globalized supply chain and relooking at the variables that went into making any decisions around being more global versus regional. And certainly what they're finding is a lot of those assumptions have changed in terms of cost, right? Whether it's transportation costs or cost of the human resources that participate in the process, the tax implications, et cetera. And reviewing those assumptions, what they've really found is there is a value to proximity. There is a value to being closer to the point of demand when it comes to supply for certain products, certain industries.
And just to get a sense of what we mean by proximity, we don't necessarily mean bringing it back to the United States itself. It can be Mexico, it can be the Americas, relatively proximate compared with Asia and China, correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. So
Right.
if I would take a step back, when you think about the research, we always start with the hypotheses, right? And we thought we would find something interesting here. And I'll be honest, in 30 years of being in supply chain, to see that 80% of executives say that they are reevaluating their global supply chain was a very surprising number.
Wow.
And so that the volume or the total is pretty significant. Certainly they are looking at a variety of different options, whether it's Mexico, Central America, South America, the Caribbean. There's a lot of options available. But the other point that really surprised me was how quickly they wanted to potentially make changes if the business case panned out. And looking at over 60% said they want to make a move in the next 2 years. So not only are they all looking at it, there's a volume, but there is a timeline that they're working towards, which is fairly rapid.
80% is indeed a very impressive number. You say reevaluating, though. I mean, these executives have a number of criteria they need to keep in mind, some of them conflicting. So, JP, I'm wondering how much of a priority is proximity actually for U.S. executives based on your findings of this survey?
Yeah, well, I want to point out two results from the survey. One is that 3 out of 5 executives say that the global trade environment is forcing their business to kind of rethink their focus on regional and domestic sourcing and distribution. The other statistic is also about 3 to 5 out of these executives are saying that resilience and speed to market are the dominant objectives, pushing them to draw their supply chains closer to the Americas. And so I think those are pretty important factors, and they are top of mind for U.S. executives.
Mm-hmm. Mary, would you agree with that? Do you see the same kinds of priorities, and the proximity is indeed high on the agenda when these considerations are being made?
Yeah, I go back to there's value. There's value in being closer, cutting out some of that lead time requirement that the global supply chain created for many of these supply chains.
Mm-hmm. Up to this point, I mean, the whole rationale for offshoring in the first place was a cost play. Labor was cheaper. And that was like number one on the list. But I hear you both saying to me that that may still be an important consideration, but cost is not king necessarily in terms of this proximity. Even if it might cost a little more in the short run, it's still there on the table, right next to cost, right? Mary, you
You're
think?
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. In fact, I mean, I can say I did a lot of those business cases at a point in time in my career.
Mm-hmm.
And we pointed to in the report around the fragile assumptions and the sensitivity of some of those assumptions in the business case. We do believe that all companies will be evaluating their global supply chains. Some will make a move, right? Not every industry, not every company can ultimately deglobalize their supply chain. But is there an opportunity to get more regional supply closer to the point of demand, cutting out some of that risk and uncertainty that falls between that global and regional supply chain? And that proximity has a value. And I think every company has experienced the value that they're going to get out of having a little bit closer supply chain sources of supply for their supply chains to the U.S. market specifically.
Well, JP, let me dig a little deeper into this concept of proximity being a priority, because I've seen other surveys that begin to suggest that some of these supply chain executives have a pretty short memory. That indeed the whole COVID-19 thing is beginning to fade in the background, and that they are now being pressured to adopt cost once again as a driving factor. And yet, it seems to me in this survey that they do remember the importance of resilience, and that that is indeed the case. Can you support that in findings from the survey?
Yeah, I think what we see is that while cost is a major factor, I think executives are more cognizant now that cost might be more of a short-term factor.
Mm-hmm.
Cost, things that are driving cost change, like, geopolitical situation, tax incentives, labor costs, all these things change and evolve. What we're seeing is that proximity is more of a long-term view. Things like developing relationships with your suppliers and having those suppliers closer to you fosters better, stronger relationships. And so while cost remains important, the survey is clearly suggesting that there are other factors that are just as important.
On top of that, it seems that it's not always an either or proposition between cost and proximity, because we're now hearing that, for instance, in a lot of cases, the labor rates in Mexico are actually cheaper than China. And then you add on the logistics cost and the uncertainties of that, and you have it's a cost play as well as a proximity play. So that's very interesting. Mary, what do you think then do these findings reveal about the future of supply chain management? Is this a permanent change in sourcing strategy?
I would say, answering a couple of questions, I do think that supply chain executives have not forgotten about the challenges of the last
Mm.
couple of years. And they have absorbed that disruption that it was that it caused. And I think that now they have a moment to raise their head and think strategically about their supply chains. And I don't think this is a shift, and it'll stay that way for years to come. I think companies are now looking at the fact that they need to constantly reevaluate their supply and their sources of supply and the relationships that they have with their tier one, tier two, et cetera, suppliers, and the importance of having better visibility and transparency across their supply chains. And the move to being more regional actually promotes their ability to have some of that visibility that they need to really manage their supply chains.
But going forward, does it carry its own set of risks in this move to shift? I mean, are there concerns that have to be considered before strategy is actually implemented?
When I think about the risks of supply chain, I don't think the risks themselves change. I think the potential for those risks change. And some of the things that we mentioned before are really the critical factors. Once you've decided to make a change and move your sources of supply, are you building those elements that help reduce the risk where you have stronger relationships, right? And you have the ability to constantly reevaluate where your supply is coming from, and you have more control over that.
And Jean-Pierre, do you see this survey as more of a as less of a snapshot and more of an indication of a true shift that we'll see extending into the future?
I think what we see in the survey is that this is going to remain kind of top of mind. As Mary said, executives need to continually reassess their uh, their their sourcing and supply chain strategy, and that's got to be led by data, better data, in order to be able to more timely make decisions and leveraging analytics to help them make better decisions.
Jean-Pierre Trouillot and Mary Rollman of KPMG, I want to thank both of you so much for joining me to talk about the results of this survey on the proximity play that so many supply chains seem to be undertaking right now, reasons why, and what it might look like in the future. Thanks very much for being with me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.